We got Latvia here. Awesome. It's been a while. I've been in when was I in Riga? I think that was in the middle of 2017. That was a good time. I think we're actually live on YouTube as well now. Miami, hello. Good to have you guys here. I think. Who can check on YouTube if the stream on YouTube is good? Are you guys on there? Hey, my buddy Zenius. Awesome. What's up, man? Whoever has the YouTube app open, just let me know if you guys can see the live stream going. Let's see if there's someone in the chat here. I'm gonna go public, so that should appear. Hello, Vietnam. I'm doing well, Syria. Thanks for asking. So we're gonna do a little bit of a Q&A, as well as I'm gonna go through some of the questions that I've been getting here from guys um, prior to this chat. Hello, we got our first viewer here on YouTube. Let me know if this stream is working. Oh, it says it is. Awesome. Good to see you guys here. And yeah, a few things that I want to talk to you guys a bit about is all these claims out there on certain diets being better than other diets, and I think this has been out there for a while, and I get this a lot. So guys will post, let's say, dairy's evil, dairy's bad, or red meat is bad, or something like that. And you guys will notice these debates on pretty much every YouTube channel out there, or any Instagram. There's always going to be someone making a ridiculous claim, and our first instinct oftentimes is, to defend our position. And really, one of the most important things that I want to let you guys know here, and how a scientific process would even work, is number one, the person that is making the claim would actually have to prove their stance first, right? So if you're the one making the claim, like for example, dairy makes you fat, or I don't know, keto. Here, someone mentioned keto is the best diet in the world, and it's gonna get you shredded, and you can eat as many calories as you want, or you don't have to count calories. Well, that's a claim that you then have to support with proof and with evidence, which is something that oftentimes these guys that make these types of comments, they don't do. So if you jump to conclusion, you're like, okay, well, here's why that's not true, then you're actually then entering yourself in some random debate with someone who isn't even scientific, so it's kind of a waste of time. So you guys will come across a lot of this in your journey, is because you're learning by watching this live. You're learning from an evidence-based source, so you will be um, a lot of this will actually come your way, and you're going to have to, quote unquote, defend your stance. So you will actually be dealing with this a lot. I want to give everybody a shout out here on YouTube. Uh, hello, Nojan, a cool beard. Thanks, man. Hello, everybody on Insta. That's pretty cool. And yeah, welcome everybody here. So I'm gonna go through a few questions that have been posted around here, and I'm gonna actually go through some of that stuff for you guys. And a few things that I want to go over as well is some of these mistakes that I've been seeing guys make when they're trying to build muscle, right? Very, very common ones. And I think a lot of you guys will have stumbled upon some of this in your journey, regardless of your experience. You've probably made these mistakes, same as I have, some of them. And it's a very common kind of pattern that we all fall into. So the first mistake, really, when it comes to gaining muscle and losing fat in general, when people are talking about, I want to get to a specific goal, is lack of an overall structure, right? So trying to wing things, trying to kind of wing it, or do something where you feel like something is going to work. So you're being sort of like intuitive, but this is not the good place to be intuitive. All right, so I'm going to explain to you guys what that means. So the problem with us and the way we're wired is that we can't necessarily adhere to a consistent process without that process being outlined and clear and trackable and measurable. So oftentimes when we think we're intuitively training or we're intuitively following a structure, we're more often than not just all over the place and nothing is really happening. And that's what I'm seeing with a lot of people in trying to build muscle, is that they're not using any kind of app for tracking their weights, in a simple example, or they're changing their exercises too frequently, or they're not adhering to any kind of a set progression scheme, or they're not really training with any kind of logic behind it. So you kind of go to the gym, you do what you feel is gonna work, and you follow, I'm gonna just bench today, or I'm gonna do my tricep today, or I'm gonna do this or this, but it doesn't have any logical structure. And another thing is that if you don't know a month ago that you've done this amount of weight and now a month later you have not seen any kind of progress, no extra reps, not a better technique, no weight being added, you're not really being progressive with your training. And if you're not progressive with your training, you're not actually making any gains. And that's the root cause of a lot of people's problems, where you can train for years, and despite being training for years and you're quote unquote experienced lifter, you could rate yourself on a scale of intermediate to advanced, and how that goes. And oftentimes you would say an intermediate lifter is someone who's been lifting for about 1 to 3 years on average. And this can happen, but in those 3 years of training you may still be a newbie or beginner, and that happens. That happens to a lot of guys. They're still beginners, and even though they've been training for 3 years. And yeah, oftentimes people are not training hard enough. That's also the case, but a lot of it is really lack of structure and a lack of any lack of what really counts within a training session. So let me give you guys an example. So for a long time there's been this marketing kind of propaganda, I would call it, with this muscle confusion effect. So this is just an example how guys can put something that doesn't contribute as much to results as kind of the biggest priority. So they would say in the quote unquote muscle confusion marketing is that you have to confuse your muscle by doing new exercises all the time. So you need to switch things up, as guys often say. If you ask someone in the gym, so why are you doing this crazy exercise? I don't even know what the name is. They're often saying, well, I'm switching things up. In reality, what that means is that the person is just winging it, and what's really happening more on a kind of physiological level is that you're learning how to do the lift, and because you're learning how to do the lift, you can't be as progressive with the lift from the first kind of couple of times you do it, if you've never done it before. And you're not actually progressing. You're kind of just getting yourself to baseline before you can progress to overload that lift. So I'm going to give you guys an example of that, and this is very, very common. So guys will do the barbell bench press. They're going to stick with that barbell bench press maybe for 2 weeks, and then they're going to switch to dumbbells. Then they're going to switch from the dumbbells to the incline. They're going to switch from the incline to I don't know, the chest fly. Then from the chest fly, they're going to switch to something else, and then they're going to go back to the Smith machine. Then they're going to do the bench press, and they're consistently switching up movements, so they're never really being progressive with the movements. So they're kind of getting up to the level where they were before, and by the time they were supposed to be progressing, now they have to again switch the movement. So you're stuck in this learning phase, so you're never really making any progress. And this is very, very common in the gym, especially with guys who are kind of stuck in that intermediate purgatory where they don't commit to the lift long enough. Very common mistake, and guys make this mistake all the time. And another one, I'm going to go through some of this here. Let me just check out the comments. Hey, YouTube. Hey, everybody here. Hey, everybody on Insta. Let me check some of the comments. Fruit tastes too good. Keto is not for me. I get you, bro. 100%. I love fruit. Keto is definitely not for me as well. I tried, and it hasn't worked out. So actually, a lot of my clients they like lower press, military press here. They like lower carb, but that works for them. But for the most part, I think we don't have anybody on keto right now. There's a lot of people that that, I mean, tried it. We tried it with a lot of people. They just haven't been able to be consistent in the past. They've tried keto and just didn't work out because it's just very antisocial for a lot of people. Now, another thing that I want to say here is a very common mistake that actually someone's been asking about this here is overtraining and under recovering, right? And actually, there's been a lot of nonsense out there that overtraining doesn't exist. I think you guys have all heard about it. So this hypothesis, like you cannot overtrain, and this is just a bunch of nonsense. For a natural lifter, there's definitely limits to how much you can adapt and how much you can handle. And with any stressor, training is a stressor. You can only tolerate so much, and once you reach that threshold of tolerance, you will start accumulate a massive amount of fatigue, and your performance will start to become masked by that amount of fatigue, and performance can even go down, which is called overreaching. So you reach a point where you're not actually able to progress anymore. Before you're going to overtrain, you're going to overreach a little bit, and if you keep pushing and you keep doing more and more and more and more, you will actually overtrain. And this definitely exists. I mean, there's been I think Gonzalez Badillo 2005 great study on training volume, and they basically looked at people that have done kind of a lower, moderate, and high volume, and they basically figured that the moderate volume group made the most gains, and that's the group that is kind of in between overtraining and undertraining. So there's somewhat of a sweet spot in between where a lot of your gains will be made, and it's important to know this. And one thing I would really pay attention to is your personality. So a lot of people will kind of categorize themselves in this type of scenario where you have to hold yourself back, where if you don't, you will naturally overtrain. So you want to go there and you want to hit it really hard every time, which then leads to overtraining eventually. But then there's also another group and kind of a category of people who naturally, for some reason, they don't push themselves as much, and they're undertraining very often. So a typical scenario would be someone who finishes their bench press and they have 5 reps left in the tank, and the rep target was 10. They got 10, but they could have technically gotten 15. So they're always training in a way that they're undertraining on the amount that they could push within a set, and also the amount of sets, and the weight that they're doing has never been that weight that leads to the maximum adaptation. So they're making some gains, but they're not making the most gains that they could be making. So kind of checking in with that speed spot there, that's really, really, really important for you to figure that out where it is for you. And for the most part, I like to start off guys on the lower end of the volume. So depending on your level of experience, an intermediate, probably around 10 sets per muscle group per week. And then we would scale it up, and we would then see how much you can actually tolerate, how much you can keep adapting. And that's a problem there. If you, let's say if you were an intermediate lifter and you're like, okay, let's start with 20 sets per muscle group per week. Where do you go from there? Like you will eventually either burn out, or it's just going to be too much work, and you will have to deload too frequently, so you're never really training in a progressive way. Really, really important. And a third mistake that I want to mention here, it's a very common one when we're talking about gaining muscle, and this has been inspired actually by a lot of you guys' comments, and that's guys are stuck in this perma-cutting phase, right? So they're consistently worried about gaining body fat, and it's almost like there's some kind of magic that happens, that if you go from 10% body fat to 13, all of a sudden like you can't gain anymore, you have to cut. And this has been a problem for a lot of people that before they answered some of my programs, we've been kind of chatting, and they go through this assessment. Even before that, we kind of chat and see if they're the right fit, and at some point we kind of realize, okay, what have you been doing for the last year? And it's this whole scenario where someone goes on a gaining phase, they gain a little bit of body fat, they freak out, they go back on a cut, they cut, then they jump again into a gaining phase, they gain a little bit too much body fat, they go back into a cut. So they're consistently perma-cutting, so they never really gain any momentum, and this is happening almost on a weekly basis. So they never really advance at all in the gym, especially with the lifts. The lifts kind of stay the same, and there's no progress being made. And you can be in that phase for a long time before you notice what's going on. So it's just a lack of overall commitment to a phase, right? And how long should you bulk? I mean, that really depends on where you're at right now in your journey. It can be anywhere from 4 to 10 months, depending on where you're at. It really depends. But I would say, if your bulk, if your idea of a bulk or a gaining phase or a lean gaining phase is just to be in a surplus for a couple of weeks, you're definitely not maximizing your gains and how much you could gain. What are you going to do in a couple of weeks? You go back to a deficit, you're not going to do anything. So I'm a big fan of really having a phase where you have a lot of structure and you have a lot of commitment. So you know what you're doing, you're very focused, you're very progressive with your training, and you align your training to the gaining phase. So you know that if you have more food coming in, you can recover more. And that's a lot of uh, that really puts and stacks all the variables in your favor, which is really important for someone who is an intermediate or advanced lifter, is that even those small things can make a lot of difference. It can actually mean a difference between you gaining and not gaining anything, which is huge, right? So you could literally be going to the gym and not gaining. As an advanced lifter, it's very, very common. So a lot of guys, if your things aren't sorted out in a way they need to be, like, I don't know, sleep is messed up, your diet is a little bit too sloppy, you're not as progressive in the gym, and you're kind of doing, I would say, like 80% good, you're not seeing, you can barely see any gains whatsoever as an advanced lifter. And it's almost like there's a threshold after which you kind of put all these things together and reach that threshold, after which you start gaining, which is really, really, I mean, it's nasty, right? It's a pain in the ass, but it's the only way you can do it, because the body doesn't want to gain as much because you're closer to your genetic potential. Now, in intermediate, you have more leeway where you can make a lot of mistakes and still gain. As a beginner, you can make all kinds of mistakes and still gain. And this is where it's common, in the gym after a year or two of training. That's where a lot of guys are stuck, because they hit that wall and their sloppy methods no longer work after they gain their first 20 pounds of muscle or first 10 kilos. It just doesn't work anymore. And that's on average, right? Someone may hit that wall much earlier because they are not genetically gifted and their training completely sucks. Some might not hit that wall if they're genetically very gifted, and they can kind of get away with sloppy training for years. But it's still happening. So at some point, you will still hit that wall, right? So it's important to know what to do and to become more deliberate, structured, and more planned and more knowledgeable, because that's what it takes to get to that next level. So I'm going to check some of these feeds. Been running here on YouTube. Hey everybody, here. Cool. There's a lot of questions here. We got a bunch of people. Hey Instagram. Um, Someone is asking about some Grayskull program. I do not know what that program is, and I have no clue. That's something I have no clue. Luigi spotted in the background. Oh, I don't know where Luigi is. He's probably somewhere having intimate time with the princess. What's the advice for permacutters? Okay, so if you've identified yourself as a permacutter, it's time for you to to get back to reality, which is that you don't have to be shredded 10% body fat all year round. Uh, that's the that's really an illusion, right? So a lot of people will fall into this illusion because you will see it on Instagram, you will see it on YouTube, you will see a lot of people promote this idea of being consistently shredded all year round, non-stop, not allowing any fat gain whatsoever. And only once you've done that, and I've done it for a long time, only until you've done it can you realize that this is just a bunch of bullshit. And not just from a standpoint of not being able to be progressive with your training. That's the least of your problems when we're talking about perma-cutting. That's the least problem. The other problem, like the most annoying one for me personally, is just the emotional stress that you get from gaining and then cutting. That's the biggest problem. Like that's the worst one, because it occupies your mind consistently. You're worried. You're taking pictures. You feel a little bit more bloated. You feel like shit, even though you're looking great and you've made progress. You still feel like crap, right? It's a huge, huge problem. Another one, which is a big one for me, is consistent food control. So that takes a lot of your deliberate like focus. You have to focus on food control for years, which is a big problem, right? So especially when you have social events, when you have let's say holidays coming up, and you have a lot of things happening, this is a huge issue because you have that holiday and you want to let loose, you want to enjoy, you want to eat maintenance. But then let's say because you're so paranoid about gaining anything, you eat a little bit more sodium, you put on a little bit of more weight, even though it wasn't fat, you just freak out and you're like, oh my God, I have to cut. And you cut again. So it's really this never ending rat race where you're consistently racing to stay lean and you're just making zero progress whatsoever. A very, very bad situation to be in. So the perma-cutting is more of an issue of psychology than it is an issue of physiology. And this is where you have to kind of go over certain things in your own psyche, which are blocks that are preventing you from actually making progress. And this is huge, right? I've been there, and you have to kind of learn to love yourself, regardless of whether you're 10%, 12%, or 15 or 20% body fat or whatever it is. And a lot of us, if you come into this journey overweight, you never want to gain an ounce of fat for the rest of your life. I know how that feels. But in order for you to be at your best, in order for you to restore yourself on a hormonal level and get yourself mentally and physically ready for a proper phase, you have to be able to live with that fact that there's a little bit of sacrifice before you can get into another phase. And this is also one of the reasons why a lot of natural bodybuilders and competitors who've been training for decades, you don't compete every year. Like, you do not compete every year. You take breaks and you compete every second or every third year or even every fourth year. A lot of them take a break. Like one of my buddies, who's a natural lifter, a natural competitor, I think he took a break of 5 years between his competitions. And 5 years of very progressive, aggressive, hardcore training, pretty much everything on point. He showed up in 5 years and he's actually made progress. You can see on his physique that he's actually made progress. And you'd be surprised how little that, I mean, overall his weight scale has changed. Maybe a couple of, like a pound extra. When he got shredded, he got more shredded, but he had more muscle left on him. And that's really what the difference is. And being a natural, that's the journey, right? That's really the journey. So he was fighting for 5 years after, I mean, 18 years of overall training experience. So 5 years extra on top of that is adding more, but it's still like in those 5 years he hasn't been able to make that much progress. So that's really the journey. So he couldn't, if he kept competing year after year, he would just be exactly the same. So now he decided, okay, I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to do it. I'm going to compete every 4 years. And that's really how it's done. So that's just a lesson. And I kind of am in the same boat, is that you should be spending most of your year in a gaining phase. So most of your year, so about, I would say 8 months of the year should be spent gaining. And only about, I would say 4 out of those 12 months should be spent on any kind of deficits, or maybe a little bit more, but it's just kind of a rough figure depending on where you're at. And I think that's a really nice balance for most people. So pretty cool. We got a bunch of questions here. Let me see what's going on Instagram, and what's going on here on YouTube. Someone is saying here, can you refer us to some of your own programs? Well, if you go to, here's how you can get in touch with me related to coaching. You go to atomic.com. There's a contact button there. You can also check in via social media if you just message me. Another way you can get in touch is actually if you go to the client's results page on atomic.com, you can see there's a bunch of people results there, and there's also a button there you can click to contact, and you can find out about the coaching programs. I don't do any info products or anything like that. I have a mentoring program, which is a 6-month-long mastermind program where I'm coaching you personally, and That's what I'm currently doing. So I don't do any kind of info products or PDFs or anything like that. Full on customized coaching. That's really what I'm all about. Um, let's check in some of the other stuff here. Someone is asking here about supplements. You guys, I'm not a big supplement fan, so I'm not gonna talk a bit about supplements because that's just an absolute waste of our time. I believe that it's not gonna make that much of a difference for any one of you guys. Now it's winter here in Europe, although I'm in Spain right now, so it's not that cold. But still, if you spend most of your time indoors, the only supplement I would comfortably recommend would be vitamin D. Other than that, I think you can pretty much go without any kind of supplements. And just because vitamin D is so hard to get from the diet, you can, but it's just more difficult. And get a liter of milk a day, that also works. You can get, I think the easiest way would be to get about 120 grams of mackerel per day if you want to get that vitamin D game up. But you can also just take the supplement, which would be much easier. Cool, cool. So I'm gonna try to scroll through some of these and check in. Someone's asking full body workouts or split workouts. I've been training a lot in full body style. I've been doing full body training every single day for almost a year. So maybe a little bit biased there, but definitely can work in either way. I'm not a big fan of a typical bro split. I think that's just a waste of time unless you're taking a large amount of drugs, which then I don't know what you're doing on this stream. You should go listen to someone who is in that boat. But other than that, I mean, splits like upper lower, push pull legs, full body, all can do magical things if you set them up right. I'm a big fan of training each muscle group somewhere between 2 up to 5 times a week. Cool. Awesome. So I'm gonna get some water. You guys are doing really well today. We got a cat here as well. Food plan like RSD Max. Well, my buddy RSD Max, he's actually made. I've made a video for him, which you can check out on rsdmax.com/fitness. You can see a video that I made for him about his plan. So how I designed the plan for him. So you can check that out. It's rsdmax.com/fitness, I think, or even just go to rsdmax.com. I think it's one of those on the menu. You can check out. So someone is asking here why there are no client results of girls. Because I don't work with girls. I don't train female athletes. So if you are a girl, if you identify as one, I can recommend you someone who's going to work with you, who's going to be a better client, a better coach for you for sure. I used to work with girls in the past a little bit, but it's just my focus is more on getting guys extremely jacked and shredded, and that's really what I'm about. But yeah, if you do want to get coached, I can make some recommendations for you. So it's a bunch of other questions here. One of these is about failure. Training with failure is a really interesting concept. There's a lot of people that will say that you must train a failure on every single set in the gym. Failure is definitely a tool. I use failure a lot in my programs. It has to be used very strategically, so it can't just be one of those black and white things. And I know this is not a sexy answer for all of you guys, because most of the time when people ask the question, "Oh, should I be training failure?" It's really the question, should I be taking all the sets to failure and all the exercises, or should not be doing failure at all? Oftentimes it can be that kind of a debate. The reality is that it's much more nuanced, so you have to use it strategically as a tool, and especially if it's a part of something like myo reps or drop sets and some other form of added I would say stress in a way that myo reps do it, for example. There's a benefit there to going to failure in some of those lifts because they are going to be high rep, and you will be 100% sure that you've reached a point of maximum activation, right? If you don't go to failure, there's always this kind of debate in your mind. Well, could have I gotten a couple of more reps or not? And that's really where it's all about. I'm not a huge fan of training failure every workout. I should, I mean, I should say that I never do it myself every workout. I've never done any. I've really never gone to failure in every single set. Even in my bro days, I don't think I've ever done that. It just didn't make sense, because I would always wipe out after the first set to failure, and I would always be weaker for the rest of the workout. So it's almost like intuitively, that it's not the way to go. But definitely has a place in the training program, training to failure, that is. Cool, cool. So yeah, a lot of people here are actually asking about coaching. So when we're talking about coaching, as I said earlier, I do a 6-month program. You can find more details about it on my website. Just go to atomic.com, to click clients, or click about or contact, or just watch the free webinar, the free presentation there. I will go into some of the details on that, so you can get to know that quickly. Um, a bunch of stuff here as well. Um, Let me try to go through some of these. Someone is asking here, arms are not growing. Um, Very similar actually to the muscle building that I talked about earlier. So if your arms are not growing, one of the most common mistakes guys make in the gym is that they're not doing lifts with correct form. I think that's probably the most common mistakes when it comes to arm training, is that guys are just simply doing uh, their entire body and forcing their arms to do less work, because you're naturally cheating on all the reps. And that's a really common one that I see. I'd say almost every day in the gym, that I see someone blasting their arms with a tremendous amount of volume, doing 3 different exercises, 3 sets each, very bad form, turning a bicep curl into a clean and press, or clean and jerk, or some other movement. And that's really, you can even see that the angle of you can see that the angle here in their bicep is not, the bicep is not even contracting. That's how bad it is, right? And if one thing I can say for sure with arm training is that your form has to be really, really good. Your technique, it has to be good. You need to know what you're doing, and it's not even as much as for exercise. Of course, you need to have some understanding of biomechanics, what to do, what not to do. So on a curl, don't lean back when you're contracting. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense, right? So think about it. Gravity's pulling down. If you lean back, you put your elbow under the barbell, you take tension off of the bicep. Some basic common sense like that. But for the most part, just cheating on the reps is just what's killing guys' results when it comes to arm training. And not eating enough, like the stuff that I mentioned earlier, constantly cutting. How can you expect your arms to grow if you're not eating enough, and if you don't have a solid plan put together? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. um Someone says here, to find out about the program, just go through the webinar, and you're gonna get more stuff. You're gonna get emails about it, and you can talk to me and the team about it. So we're gonna let you know what the details are and everything else. There's a lot of questions here, so I'm gonna try to go through some. Someone's asking about non-fish meat substitutions. So you don't want to eat meat, so you don't want to eat fish, and you're looking for meat. I don't understand. That's a tough one. Someone's asking about Bulgarian training. Um, I'm not sure what that really means, actually. I don't know what Bulgarian training. I have a lot of friends from Bulgaria, but um, I don't think they train any any differently than I would than I would train in Croatia or here in Spain. There's been a lot of books, I think, Bulgarian, like squat every day and things like that. I don't think that's definitely a way to go for most people. It doesn't make any sense. Cool. Awesome, guys. So great jumping on this stream. I'm gonna actually have to jump off. So great stream, great questions, everybody. This has been awesome. I'm gonna try to leave the stream up on YouTube. I think I know how to do that. So I hope it remains that when you guys check it out. So you can go to YouTube. You can probably do a replay. I'm gonna try to actually leave it also on Instagram. I think I know how to do that. I just have to like do that one slider after it ends. Um, a lot of questions here. Come to Australia. I was actually planning to come to Australia. It just not this year. There's a lot of stuff that I have to do in Europe this year, and there's a tour and a bunch of events that I'm doing, and it's not in. It just doesn't fit because it's so far away that going to Australia would just take so much out of me in terms of energy, and I would be very far from. In case something happens, I would have to be closer to home and things like that. So I try to stay as much as possible next to home. So yeah, maybe Australia next year. Cool guys. So I'm gonna jump off of the stream on YouTube. Thanks everybody for being here. You guys are awesome, and I will check you guys soon. I'll try to do more of these. Just kind of tuning in. I just set this whole thing up, and it looks like it works. So I think it's a good way to communicate, and it's actually very quick and very fast as well. No uploading needed, and no editing needed as well, which is really cool. So yeah, I'll catch you guys soon on YouTube and Instagram. You're still there. So